The kitchen was too quiet for a Tuesday. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Not the casserole dishes stacked on the counter, foil covered, from neighbors who didn't know what else to bring. Not the black dress still hanging over the back of a chair, not yet put away, because putting it away felt like something I wasn't ready to do. Just the quiet. The specific quiet of a house that used to have two people's noise in it and now only has one. My name is Olivia. I'm 29. 3 days ago, I buried my husband. His name was Marcus. He was 31 years old. He had a laugh that filled rooms he wasn't even standing in yet. You could hear him coming, 2 doors down, and somehow it always made you smile before you saw his face. He died on a Tuesday too, 10 days before this one, in a hospital room I will never fully leave, even though I walked out of it the normal way, on my own 2 feet, into a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and felt like the end of everything. I'm not going to walk you through how he died. Some things belong only to the people who lived them. What I will tell you is what happened after. The funeral was Saturday. Small, the way Marcus would have wanted it. He never liked being the center of attention, not really, despite the laugh that filled rooms. 40, maybe 50 people. His college roommate flew in from Seattle. His mother, who I now call my mother too, stood beside me the entire service with her hand wrapped around mine so tight I had bruises the next day, the good kind, the kind that means someone is holding on because letting go isn't an option. My parents came late. I want to say that plainly, without drama, because that's how it happened. The service started at 11. My parents arrived at 11:20, slipped into a back pew, and left before the reception even began. No condolences to Marcus's mother. No hug for me. My father nodded at me once, from across the room, the kind of nod you'd give a coworker in a hallway. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Grief makes you generous with everyone's behavior but your own. I told myself they were uncomfortable, that death makes people strange, that my mother had never been good with feelings even on an ordinary day, let alone one like this. I kept telling myself that for 3 more days. Here's what you need to understand about my parents, because the story doesn't make sense without it. My mother, Carol, has spent my entire life curating an image of our family that has very little to do with the actual people in it. We were the family with the matching Christmas cards. The family whose home always looked photo-ready, where conflict happened, if it happened at all, behind closed doors and was never, ever discussed at the dinner table or in front of guests. My mother did not raise me to feel things. She raised me to manage the appearance of feeling things correctly, at the correct volume, for the correct amount of time. My father, Robert, learned a long time ago that the path of least resistance in our house ran straight through agreeing with my mother. Not because he agreed. Because disagreeing cost more than it was worth, and somewhere along the way, he decided the cost wasn't worth paying. Not for big things. Not for small things. Not, as it turned out, for me. I married Marcus 4 years ago. My mother attended the wedding the way you'd attend a work obligation, present, polite, faintly disapproving of small details she never quite articulated. Marcus came from a family with less money than mine, more love than mine, and my mother never once let me forget which of those facts she considered more important. I loved him anyway. I loved him entirely. The text came on Tuesday morning. 3 days after the funeral. I was standing in the kitchen, looking at the foil-covered casseroles I hadn't eaten any of, trying to remember if I'd had coffee yet, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a group text. My mother, my father, my Aunt Diane, my mother's sister, who I'd always liked, who I thought, foolishly, might be a softer presence in this particular family. The text wasn't to me. That's the part that took me a full minute to understand. My mother had meant to send it to my aunt alone, a private complaint about scheduling, about how the burial had disrupted some other plan, some lunch or appointment I never found out the details of, because none of that mattered once I read the rest of the message. I know it's sad about Marcus, but honestly, can we please stop treating this like it's the only thing happening this month? It was a trivial event in the grand scheme of things, and Olivia needs to learn that life goes on. I have my own things going on too. My name had been added to the group by accident. Or maybe not by accident. I'll never know which, and somewhere in the month since, I've stopped needing to know. I read it 4 times. A trivial event. My husband's burial. The day I put the only person who had ever made me feel entirely, unconditionally myself into the ground, in a box, under dirt that I watched them shovel because I refused to leave before it was finished, that was, to my mother, a trivial event. An inconvenience competing for calendar space against whatever else she had going on. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I cried, because that's the part of grief people understand, the part that makes sense in a story. I didn't. I stood in my kitchen, in the too quiet house, holding my phone, and I felt something colder than crying. Something that had been building under the numbness for 10 days, finally finding a shape. I called my father first. Not my mother. I think some small, stubborn part of me still believed, even then, that he might be different from her if I gave him the chance alone, away from her voice in his ear. He picked up on the second ring. "Olivia," he said. "Careful." He'd clearly already heard about the text. My mother must have called him the second she realized her mistake, must have started managing the narrative before I'd even finished reading it the second time. "Did you see what she sent?" I said. Not a question. I already knew he had. "Your mother didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said. "You know how she gets when she's stressed. She's been under a lot of pressure with the..." "Dad," I said. "She called Marcus's burial trivial." Silence on the line. The particular silence of a man calculating the cost of disagreement, the way he always had, the way I'd watched him do my entire childhood without ever fully understanding what I was watching until exactly this moment. "I think you're reading too much into one badly worded text," he said finally. "I want to tell you about the version of myself that existed in the seconds after my father said that sentence, because she's not someone I recognize easily now, looking back. She was tired. Bone tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. She had spent 29 years finding the generous interpretation of everything her parents did, because the alternative, believing they simply didn't love her the way parents are supposed to, was too large a thing to hold while also trying to function as a person in the world. She had just buried her husband. And her father, on the phone, 3 days later, was still managing his wife's reputation instead of asking his daughter how she was doing. "There's no version of trivial that's badly worded, Dad," I said. "There's just trivial. That's what she thinks this is. That's what she thinks Marcus was." "That's not fair," my father said, and something in his voice sharpened, defensive now instead of careful. "Your mother loved Marcus." "My mother came 20 minutes late to his funeral and left before the reception," I said. "My mother has never once, in 4 years, said his name without something underneath it. And now I have it in writing, Dad. I have exactly what she thinks of him. Of us. In writing." "You're grieving," my father said. "You're not thinking clearly. I want you to notice what he did there, because I almost missed it myself, in the moment." He didn't defend the words. He couldn't, there was no defending them. So instead, he redirected the entire conversation toward my state of mind. Made the problem my grief instead of her cruelty. It is, I would learn, one of the oldest moves in the family playbook. I just hadn't recognized it before, because it had never been pointed so directly at the worst day of my life. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 10 days, I said. "I'm thinking clearly enough to know that you're going to take her side. You always take her side. You took her side when she didn't come to my college graduation because it conflicted with her book club's anniversary dinner. You took her side when she didn't visit Marcus in the hospital, not once, not in 3 weeks. You're taking her side right now, with this. You always have. I just never said it out loud before." My father didn't respond right away. "I have to go," he said finally. "We'll talk about this when you're feeling more like yourself." He hung up before I could answer. I didn't call my mother. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she would say, because I had spent 29 years collecting the data, even when I refused to look directly at what it added up to. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table, Marcus's chair across from mine, empty, the way it had been for 10 days and would be for the rest of my life, and I opened my phone, and I left the family group text. Not dramatically. Not with some long speech about everything they'd done wrong. I just pressed the button. Olivia left the conversation. It felt, in that moment, less like an ending and more like finally putting down something I'd been carrying so long my arms had forgotten what it felt like to be empty. Marcus's mother, Linda, my mother now, the one who'd held my hand through the entire service until I had bruises, called me that evening. I told her everything. The text. The phone call with my father. The quiet, final press of a button that took my parents out of a conversation they'd never really been present in to begin with. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "I'm not going to tell you what to do about them," she said. "That's not mine to decide. But I want you to know something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just listen to it." "Okay," I said. "You are not required to keep people in your life because they share your blood," Linda said. "Family is supposed to be the people who show up. Not the people who share your last name. You've had a family this whole time, Olivia. It just wasn't entirely the one you were born into." I cried then. Finally. Not for Marcus, or not only for Marcus, for the strange, specific grief of realizing that the family I'd spent my whole life trying to earn approval from had never been capable of giving me what Linda had just offered freely, in one phone call, on the worst month of both our lives. The weeks that followed had a particular texture to them, grief and severance running parallel, two griefs instead of one, except one of them came with relief mixed into the pain in a way Marcus's loss never would. My mother texted twice. Both times, she framed her words as concern wrapped around an accusation. "I'm worried about you isolating yourself in your grief. This isn't healthy, Olivia. You're going to regret cutting off your family when you need us most." I didn't respond to either text. I had learned, finally, after 29 years, the difference between a question that wanted an honest answer and a sentence constructed only to be performed, to be screenshotted later and shown to relatives as evidence of how reasonable she'd been and how unreasonable I was being in return. My father didn't text at all. "I want to talk about what grief actually looks like when you're not performing it for anyone, because the version I lived through in those weeks didn't look like anything I'd seen in movies or books. It looked like standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, holding a box of the brand Marcus liked, not the brand I liked, and realizing I'd already eaten through the box I bought the week before, alone, every morning, in a kitchen that still had his coffee mug sitting exactly where he'd left it, because I couldn't make myself move it yet. It looked like Linda calling me every single evening at 7, not to check on me exactly, just to talk, about nothing, about her garden or a show she was watching, giving me 45 minutes a day where I didn't have to hold the shape of my own grief by myself. It looked like Marcus's college roommate, the one who'd flown in from Seattle, texting me a photo every few days. Marcus at 22, Marcus at a wedding, Marcus laughing at something none of us would ever know the punchline to again, small, unprompted gifts from someone who had decided, on his own, that I shouldn't have to carry the remembering by myself. None of that came from my parents. All of it came from people who had no biological obligation to show up for me at all. I think that's the part of this story I most want you to sit with, if you're watching this, because some version of it is happening in your own life right now. Family, the kind that actually matters, was never really about the blood. It was about who stayed in the room when staying cost something. My mother had never once, in 29 years, stayed in a room when staying cost her something. My father had spent his whole life making sure he never had to find out whether he would. 2 months after the funeral, I got a different kind of call. It was my father. Not a text this time, an actual call, late on a Sunday evening, his voice rougher than I remembered it, like he hadn't used it much that day. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I don't expect it to fix anything. I just need to say it." I didn't say anything. I let him have the silence to fill. "I've been thinking about that phone call," he said. "The one after the text. I've been thinking about it every day since, actually, which is more than I can say for most of the things in my life I should have thought harder about." He paused for a long time. "Your mother and I had a conversation 2 weeks ago," he said. "About retirement. About what we want the next 20 years to look like. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, completely unrelated to you, she said something about a neighbor's daughter, Some small unkindness, nothing important on its own, and I heard myself, in my head, already constructing the explanation. Already finding the version of it that wasn't really what it sounded like. The same thing I did with you. Dad, I started. Let me finish, he said, and there was something in his voice I didn't recognize, not the careful, conflict-avoidant tone I'd known my whole life, but something rawer underneath it. I've spent 35 years doing that. Finding the version of your mother's behavior that let me avoid a fight. I told myself it was keeping the peace. I think now it was just cowardice with a nicer name. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I didn't trust my voice yet. I'm not calling to ask you to forgive her, my father said. I don't think that's mine to ask for, and I don't think she'd even want it on those terms. She still believes she did nothing wrong, and I don't know if that's ever going to change. I'm calling because I need you to know that I see it now. What she is. What I let myself become by staying quiet next to it for 35 years. And I'm sorry it took losing my son-in-law and very nearly losing my daughter to finally say that out loud. Marcus would have liked you saying that, I said. It was the first true thing I'd said to my father in 2 months. He always thought you had it in you. He used to tell me that, actually. That underneath all the careful, there was someone who wanted to say more. My father made a sound on the other end of the line that might have been a laugh, or might have been something closer to crying. I couldn't tell, and I didn't ask. I'm not going to tell you my father and I fixed everything in that one phone call, because that's not how repair actually works, and I think stories that promise it cheapen something real that takes much longer and costs much more. What happened instead was slower. He started calling, actually calling, not texting, once a week, then twice. He asked about Marcus, by name, without flinching, the way he never had while Marcus was alive. He asked about me, the actual me, not the version of me that was easy to manage from a safe emotional distance. He didn't divorce my mother. I want to be honest about that too, because I know some of you might be hoping for a tidier ending than the one I actually have. They're still married. He still goes home to her every night, still sits across from her at dinner, still navigates a marriage I will probably never fully understand from the outside. But something shifted in how he shows up for me, separate from her, in the space he carved out that doesn't require her permission anymore. My mother never apologized. Not once, not in any form, not even the kind of non-apology people sometimes offer just to close a loop. As far as I know, she still believes the text was simply badly timed, that my response was an overreaction born from grief, that I will eventually come around, the way she's always assumed everyone eventually comes around to her version of events. I don't think she's wrong that I've changed how I think about her. I just don't think it's the change she's hoping for. I haven't spoken to her since the day I left that group text. My father has stopped asking me to. I think, somewhere in the last several months, he finally understood that the request itself was part of the same old pattern, managing me into smallness so the family photo could stay intact. It's been 8 months now, since the funeral. Since the text. Since the phone call that took my parents out of a conversation that was never really about them in the first place. I still think about Marcus every single day, not just in the big moments, the anniversaries, and the empty side of the bed, but in the small ones too. The brand of cereal. The way he hummed off-key doing dishes. The particular sound of his laugh, 2 doors down, that I will spend the rest of my life half listening for, even though I know, every single time, that it isn't coming. I have not stopped grieving him. I don't think I ever fully will, and I've stopped expecting myself to. Grief, I've learned, doesn't resolve. It just changes shape, takes up a little less room some days, a little more on others. But I'm not grieving alone. Linda calls every evening, still, even now, even though the urgency of those first weeks has softened into something steadier, a habit of love instead of an emergency measure. Marcus's college roommate still sends photos sometimes, unprompted, small proof that someone else is still keeping Marcus's memory alive alongside me. My father calls every Sunday, asks real questions now, sits in the discomfort of real answers instead of redirecting them. Last week, my father asked if he could come visit. Alone. Not a holiday, not an occasion, just a Tuesday, the same kind of ordinary Tuesday that used to be too quiet to bear. He showed up with a casserole dish, of all things, clearly purchased that morning, clearly the first one he'd ever made in his life judging by how carefully he carried it, like it might fall apart in his hands. We sat at my kitchen table. Marcus's chair was still across from mine. I've never moved it, and I don't think I ever will, not because I'm stuck, but because some absences are meant to stay visible. My father looked at the empty chair for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "Tell me about him," he said. "Really tell me. I want to actually know who he was, not just the version I let myself half pay attention to for 4 years." So I did. I told him about the laugh that filled rooms he wasn't even in yet. I told him about the way Marcus used to leave notes in my coat pockets, just small ones, "Just thinking of you," or "You've got this," on days he knew would be hard. I told him things I hadn't said out loud to anyone, not even Linda, because my father was finally, for the first time in 29 years, someone who stayed in the room long enough to hear them. He cried. My father, who I had never once seen cry in 29 years, sat at my kitchen table and cried over a man he'd barely known while he was alive. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it. For not knowing him better. For not knowing you better. I don't know how to fix 35 years of getting this wrong, Olivia. I just know I don't want to keep getting it wrong from here. I don't know what happens with my mother. I don't know if there's a version of this story where she eventually says something true, something that isn't about managing an image or closing a loop. I'm not holding my breath for it, and I've made peace with that, actual peace, not the performed kind I used to specialize in. But I know what family means to me now, in a way I didn't fully understand before I lost Marcus and, in some sense, lost my mother in the same brutal month. Family is the people who show up. Who stay in the room when staying costs something. Who say your husband's name without flinching, who learn the small details because the details are how you actually know someone, who sit at your kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday and cry over a man they're only now getting to know, 8 months too late, because better late, I've learned, is still better than never. My father is still learning how to be that. I think he might actually get there. My mother, I suspect, never will. And for the first time in my life, I've stopped needing her to. If you've ever had someone who shares your blood make you feel small on the worst day of your life, I hope this story found you at the moment you needed it. I don't think every story like this gets a clean ending, and mine certainly didn't. I lost my husband. I lost my mother, in every way that matters, on the same brutal stretch of road. What I got instead, slowly, imperfectly, was a father willing to finally look at himself, and a mother-in-law who taught me what the word family actually means when nobody's performing it for an audience. I'd love to know, has someone in your blood family ever made you feel like your pain was an inconvenience? Did you stay quiet, the way I almost did? Or did you find your own moment to finally say it out loud? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing. There's another one waiting next week, and if you've lost someone recently yourself, I hope today, in whatever small way it can, treats you gently. Thank you.